So how can we really tell where the heart of a movie truly lies? One of the most important ways of recognizing what a film is doing is paying attention to the film's gaze. The gaze theory in film states that all films have a way of showing images and telling stories that reflect the subjectivity of a spectator, that is the filmmaker. I think this is super important because it really helps us understand movies better. Feminists today often use the term of the male gaze to talk about the objectification and sexualization of women in movies. And there is some truth in that, but unfortunately, feminists oftentimes misuse this to point to political ideas and how a supposed patriarchy is the root of all evil. Feminism, like so many times, fails to offer an alternative to real issues. The problem with the male gaze, sexualization, objectification in media isn't political. It's all because of sin. Men are also being objectified and sexualized in movies, but way less just because most movies are directed by straight men and thus reflect the sinfulness of these male directors and the audiences they are trying to please. And movies can be sinful in so many ways, telling stories in order to spread propaganda instead of truth. They can have visual and narrative objectification of humans and cater to our primitive desires like sexual immorality, greed, envy, materialism. And it's not just action blockbusters directed by men that are affected and fall into these categories. It's romantic comedies that tell us lies about relationships, dramas that overhumanize destructive behavior, horror films that glorify evil, or art house movies that normalize sexual perversion, and also Christian films that are really nothing more than propaganda. Faith-based or not, a film can be sinful even with good intentions, but there is an alternative to all of that. Movies that show humans as made in the image of God with all our potential and sinfulness alike through the Christ-like gaze. Is there a discernible aesthetic, a way of films seeing their subject that reflects what we know from scripture about how Jesus saw things? I've broken down 7 ways of how films can have the Christ-like gaze. The first characteristic is the film's focus. Christ-like movies look where nobody's looking. Jesus always noticed things nobody noticed. Women touching his garment in the middle of a crowd. He noticed kids, he noticed the poor, the disabled. He also had the ability to see into the depths of a man's heart and wasn't blinded by surface level appearances. Movies have this great opportunity to highlight stories that otherwise wouldn't get noticed. Christ-like movies make you look at people, things, and places you would otherwise overlook. The second characteristic is this pure visuals. What do I mean by that? Jesus was a minimalist who had a real closeness to his surroundings. He was a carpenter and expert at working with his hands. He frequently fled to crowds to go to mountains, into deserts, praying lonely in total isolation. He used mud and spit for his healings and rode a donkey instead of a horse. He's the King of Kings, but was so down to earth. Christ-like movies carry this groundedness in their visuals. Images in Christ-like movies aren't here to distract or disturb you. They're here to ground you. The third characteristic is this loving storytelling. Christ-like movies define their characters by small and big actions alike. Because the filmmakers are the authors of the story and God is the author of our life, Christ-like movies all need to have a certain love for their characters. In Christ-like movies, we aren't watching the characters as spectators only, but we are right next to them, right next to their heartbreak, anger, struggle, disappointment, and hope. So Christ-like movies are often character-driven movies where characters aren't put in a box, just tightly written in order to be tools for a story, but character-driven movies have more of a life of their own. Characteristic number 4, showing necessary horror. When we look at Christianity, the centerpiece of it is a violent image. Jesus nailed on the cross in his final moments, blood all over his body. This violent image is at the same time a symbol of peace, freedom, and love. The importance of confronting our fears and evil is just key to the Christian message. And this is what a Christ-like movie should reflect as well. Christ-like movies aren't to act like evil doesn't exist, they are to show it, but always with a glimmer of light. Characteristic number 5, Christ-like movies hate sin. Jesus hated sin. He hated destructive behavior that separated us from God. Christ-like movies depict sinful behavior in a mournful way. They don't make a spectacle out of it. Christ-like movies don't empower or downplay bad behavior. Characteristic number 6, the question of fate. When a movie deals with the question of fate, it's almost impossible not to acknowledge God, because nothing in a movie happens by coincidence, because there is always an author. And we as Christians believe that God is the author of all of reality. Characteristic number 7, the ending matters. So many Christ-like films are truly defined by their final moments. There are a lot of well-made movies that end like in a really weird way with an open ending that feels lazy or unsatisfying. Imagine the life of Jesus without the resurrection. The ending does indeed define the story. You can detect a Christ-like movie by a certain grace it gives the characters in its ending.